Yeah, so the big agenda items are the operational plan.
Was the operational plan last night, and that's the opportunity for the community now to have a look at what the council's plans are for the next 12 months. So it includes both our operational expenditure and also our capital expenditure. So we've got in our capital area, which is what a lot of people are interested in, some bit over $200 million to be spent, and about 39 million of that is actually new capital works. Now that new capital works includes projects such as the library out here, which we're planning and hopefully will get underway.
Talk about it in a minute.
We can talk about that separately. Also money for the Mardi water treatment plant. So they're the big ticket items out of that CapEx program. I'm talking about new capital works program. So that's that component. The financials show that from an operational point of view, we are projecting a small surplus for next year. And we include also the 24-25 year, and it shows a small surplus there as well.
And that will be going into this new fund that you've created, is that right?
Yes, and at the moment we're travelling pretty well. I think at the moment, before we make the adjustments that the CEO talked through last night, we're currently showing at about $50 million surplus at the present time. But what I've asked the staff to do is to actually update what we call that P&L and the income and expenditure lines to include the known costs that we've got to account for this year. Now the main new cost we've got to account for is in the depreciation line, which is another $30 million, and that's come about because as we revalued all the assets values came out much higher, and to the tune of 600 odd million when we valued them under the fair valuation methodology. And that means, of course, we have to now charge more depreciation. So from one good point of view, it means we've got to spend more money on assets, but from a bad point of view, it means that we've actually reduces that surplus, bottom line surplus. So we're now forecasting, and you'll see on the far right-hand column, I believe, that we now have we've adjusted the forecast down to around 15 million.
So that's basically around the depreciation.
It's very largely the depreciation. There is an element which is a book loss, not a cash loss, of some 2.1 million, which is that land that I gave away rather than sold
for the
affordable housing Pacific Link.
Which is very interesting. It's possibly going to be your legacy, that particular project. But first of all, the election, we have a Labor government. We're not sure if we have a full Labor suite up here as yet. However, you must be pleased there were some commitments on footpaths. There's the commitment on the waterfront and more commitment on roads. You must be pleased about that.
Oh, look, we had great discussions with predominantly with the Labor Party pre the election. We had a lot of discussions with Adam and so on, and I have to say Adam has worked extremely hard for the area, and it's not his fault that we haven't had money flowing from the Liberal Party. They chose obviously to focus on Western Sydney, which has been well documented now, and that may not have helped them one way or another, but nonetheless that's where they put their efforts. Labor, and largely because we've got a strong Labor showing up here, and they all rapidly increased their percentage quite dramatically. So it's very strongly Labor up here. So I'm very hopeful that we will do very well out of this new Labor government. And the signs are good because they actually did commit in their commitments quite a lot of money. And I guess the first one I really want to see, simply because it gets the project underway, is the $8.5 million
for the
waterfront. But money for roads and footpaths is equally well wanted and received, but it just gets that other big project underway. And
so that's that $8 million, unpack that, because it's not, people shouldn't expect to see anything particularly. It's to do with geotech planning, I understand, a whole series of other bits of planning. It's an extraordinary amount of money for planning, I've got to say. Where does it all go?
When you think about what it's got to do, you see, before the state government, and bear in mind the state government's bank, TICOR, will no doubt be providing the funds. So for us to get the state investing some $350 million here, it's going to need a very strong business case. Now, to make the business case stack up, we need to understand exactly what the geotech structure is like underneath. We need to understand what the traffic flows will look like. We need to understand how you get across the highway. We need to understand the environmental factors. So that money will get spent on all of that work to consolidate a business case to hopefully enable the state government to choose to spend 350 million here rather than somewhere else.
Well, look, let's jump straight to the to Gosford. I mean, Gosford is in a lull. I think it's fair to say at the moment the cafes and restaurants around here are doing difficulty. I mean, you guys pulled out of the area a little while ago. It's noticed. However, you're committed to this regional library around the corner. A lot of people are hoping that that's going to get going. You awarded a contract, and now you're being asked to look at it again.
No, well, we didn't award the contract. We got one tenderer who came in. And what the paper to the council last night asked me to sign off on was agreeing to the process whereby we decline tenders, but we open negotiations with that tenderer.
Right.
And we'll then go through a process called value management. Now, value management is just a technique and a process to try and understand what the key risks that are in the pricing from the tenderer. If we can eliminate those risks by doing something or not asking for something, then the tenderer can reduce their price. So the outcome of that process should be that we'll get much better value for the community. But I'm very confident, Dave, that we will actually end up having the contract and getting that building built by the end of 2024.
Well, it's been a long time coming. I think we've had 25 years of contributions, at least the Gosford part of the council, for that, and it may very well change now. On to other assets. Is there any movement at the station to do with the old council building, which with TAFE having its eyes on that?
We do have a conditional contract now, which meets the trigger barrier as to whether we're going to put it back on the market. We didn't have anything substantial by the close of play this month, but we do have now a conditional contract. Most of those conditions are in our control, so I'm therefore reasonably confident that that contract will proceed. Of course, you have a new state government, and no doubt they may have some views, and we'll have to see how that progresses. But at this stage, we have a conditional contract in place, and we'll be hopefully completing the conditions from our point of view, and therefore it will become a full contract.
Well, hold our breath again in Gosford. Well, back to the operational plan. I noticed that who we call Citizen Brooks had an interesting talk at the public forum where he noted some things. He's obviously gone through it. That the lowering of a series of targets, key targets in the operational plan that were from the previous year. Now, how does that work, and what's happening behind the scenes so that you have to lower these half a dozen or so targets?
The first thing where I actually absolutely agreed with Kevin Brooks on was in fact the lack of, and we had already picked this up, and too late to change the paper, but both David Farmer and myself had noted that the staff had prepared the operational plan without putting in a table that showed in the fees and charges area what the current prices were and what the new prices were, so people could see the change. And we made no commentary about why things have gone up or down. So, and it's hard to, you couldn't pick it from the way it's been presented. So I did put in an amend one of the recommendations to include that table. So when it goes formally out, which hopefully will be next week, that table will be there. Now, in relation to Mr. Brooks' comments, I can't remember whether it was Alice Howe or David Farmer.
I think Alice Howe
answered the question to the extent is some of the measures they put in there were actually unrealistic.
Or she said too optimistic or something like that.
Unrealistic in terms of being achieved. And as you know, when you're putting even stretch targets in place, they need to be ones that are achievable, because if you can't, people just lose sight and say, well, they give up. So part of that was about getting that in place. Now, the key thing that I've been saying, and it's been coming up during the election, is why is the period administration still going on? And both Chris Minns as the new Premier and his Minister for Local Government, both have said they're not interested in changing arrangements. Part of that is about the council still needs to get itself up to speed. When you take 1 in 4 people out, leaving aside the financial thing, that was relatively easy to fix, because you cut a few things, you sell a few things, and you get loans.
But now we're sort of paying for, because you need to pay catch up, don't you? With
you
the staff that you lost.
What you're left with is when the people who do it all, when 1 in 4 of them disappears, the culture and the sort of the will to live, so to speak, disappears out until they build confidence again. So that's what we've got to do. We've got to rebuild that confidence internally, and that's why it's taking a little bit of time to get that back in on board. Because
is it the confidence or is it the numbers? Do you still have a series of vacancies?
We still have vacancies. We still have a lot.
That.
We still have a lot of vacancies. But bear in mind, it wasn't until it's only just over 6 months ago that we actually got confirmation from IPART that we got that last last rate increase locked in for 10 years, because that up till then we still had the threat that there'd be another 200 jobs had to go. So it's against that background, the CEO and the executive team, which is pretty much all new now, has got to build the trust back into the organisation. And when you're dealing with people, look, if I use our outdoor staff for a moment, they were battered and bruised and abused during that time as if it was their fault. And one thing I can guarantee, it wasn't their fault.
And last year with all the rains and the potholes and so on and so forth.
We've had a range of things
We've
which
had a
has
hard time.
just taken time to overcome. And you have to go back, it's a large organisation. It is the third largest by turnover council in Australia. It's the third largest by depreciable assets in Australia. So we are large by any shadow of means.
Well, shouldn't we be getting with the new government? We talked to all of the Labor members yesterday, and we asked them about the council. And first of all, they confirmed, or David Harris confirmed, that they won't be changing the electoral schedule. But in the 6 Cities project, or whatever you want to call it, the Greater Cities project, the Central Coast is